Good afternoon. What a fascinating day this has been. I've really enjoyed it. And what this is about is intentionality. It is about you making choices about what you want to be, or else you get affected by what is happening around you. And so you can say it's the federal government, it's the state government. It is fundamentally about you. I believe deeply that the only functional government in America today is local government. I'm going to say that again. The only functional government in America today is local government. And local government increasingly is driving success stories all across America. I've had the opportunity to be in 38 cities in the last year. In big cities and smaller cities all across America. And the cities that are succeeding are being intentional. You've heard a lot of this already, some of what I'm going to talk about now. And there's the forces of change, whether you like it or not, are relentless. They are changing your life. And Bridget gave a great example. When I say globalization, that might be remote to you. There are 16 ports on the East Coast and along the Gulf Coast spending in excess of $500 million because the Panama Canal is getting expanded. Have you all thought about what that could mean to you? Because none of that stuff wants to stay in those ports. It wants to come into the heartland of America. And Bridget and her commissioner figured that out. There is out of Norfolk, Virginia, 250 miles from Norfolk, Virginia, at Fort Royal, Virginia, there is an inland port. Had anybody here thought about Memphis being an inland port, since you're the transportation center of America? And have you had that conversation? Not by Memphis but the whole region having that, because these ports, New York City spending $1.5 billion, and Norfolk spending $500 million to expand their port, and Miami just spent $650 million to build a tunnel from their port into to get stuff out of the port onto the interstate system. And North Charleston is spending $500 million. All that stuff is moving towards you. And it's happening because the Panama Canal is expanded, and the two biggest ports in America, Long Beach and Los Angeles, some of that stuff can now come around through the Panama Canal and come to the East Coast. That's how globalization is creating both opportunities and liabilities for every community. Bridget understood that, or her commissioner understood it, and saw the opportunity when most people didn't have a clue. And that's the conversation that you need to have as a region. And I can go down through these, and all of those are relentless forces that are fundamentally redefining, which we've heard about all day, redefining the rules about whether you're going to succeed or not as a community. And this is one of the really telling numbers. You're down at the bottom, Memphis. You've lost a third of your manufacturing jobs in the last 25 years, as is the case in most cities. In the same period of time, your professional and business services jobs have increased by 145%. Your jobs in healthcare and educational jobs and technical jobs have gone up 100%. So you're moving, your economy is shifting. And if I said to you, what is the most important competitive advantage you can have to grow the professional and business services and educational health service? What's the most important competitive advantage you can have in this community? What would you tell me? Education. What you've been talking about all day. Your whole economy is changing. And if you don't create a workforce that appeals to that is going to move away. I'm not suggesting manufacturing isn't. I think manufacturing, as we've heard, is going to come back, but it's going to look very different. There's a new steel mill being built just north of Pittsburgh, and I know the guys. It's $1.5 billion. I know the guys doing it. And I said, "Why are you building a new steel mill in Pittsburgh? Why isn't it in China or Vietnam?" And they said, "Because labor costs aren't that important anymore. It's more about the transportation costs, but most of all about the talent. It's because where it would be 5,000 people making steel, 20 years ago, there's 500 now, and they're all running computers. And so we're watching the world change in a remarkable kind of way, and how you position yourselves to take advantage of that is a big deal. The other, which was mentioned, is who we are as a community are changing dramatically. You know, back when Ozzie and Harriet, and some of you are too young to even know who I'm talking about, and that defined America, there was almost 75% of the households in America were married couples. Now that is less than 50% now. And who we are and how we live and the choices we're making have huge impact on the kind of communities you're going to be. Not everybody now wants to live in that house in the suburbs in the white picket fence. In fact, people are making lots of different kinds of choices, and if your community is going to be successful, you need to make sure that those choices are available. I was just up in Chicago a year ago. ULI sponsored a conference for 60 suburban mayors and 100 or so developers, and those 60 suburban mayors are panicked because Motorola had just moved 1 million square feet of office space from a wonderful suburban community in Chicago into downtown Chicago. And Kraft Foods has just moved their headquarters and another 1 million square feet into downtown Chicago. And why are they doing that? Because those communities don't have rental housing, and they don't have good transportation access, and they don't have a there. They don't have a downtown where I can go get a cup of coffee and walk down the street and shop a little bit and go to a nice restaurant. And so they're moving because they're going, for the first time in our history, I believe something is fundamentally changing in America, which is always that jobs went to where, or that talent went to where the jobs are. I got an education and then I moved to some place where I might be able to get a job. Increasingly what we're seeing in America now is that jobs are moving where the talent are rather than talent moving where the jobs are. Increasingly, talent is the economic driver. We've heard about a little bit about that. Let me just touch a little bit on the demographics. There are people that look like us that are making fundamental decisions. We want to live more actively. We like to ride bikes, and we still run, and we do a lot of things, and we look for communities that provide that. And increasingly, this group of people are making choices about where they want to live. You heard a lot of them are moving south. Some of them aren't and are staying in other places, but they're looking for livable communities. You all ought to be reading, whether you're old enough or not, AARP magazine, because that will give you a sense of, about every month, that magazine is talking about what boomers want and where they want to live. And it's about walkable, it's about livable, it's about having good educational opportunities because many of them want to go back to school. It's about recreation. It can be a big city or it can be a small town. But we are, as a group, making choices very different than what our parents did. Even more remarkably are the millennials. Do you know the average 25-year-old in America is 6 times less likely to own an automobile than their parents at that age? That's a General Motors survey. And when we talk about transportation now, we think of highways. But what millennials are talking about when they talk about transportation is mobility. And that transportation can take a lot. It can be walking. It can be riding a bike. It can be taking transit. It's about mobility. It's about how I get from point A to point B. And so Google just opened a big development in Pittsburgh in a former sketchy neighborhood. 800 jobs. 70% of the people that work in that in Google's office there either walk or ride a bike to work. 70%. 40% of the people that now live in Washington, D.C. do not own an automobile. 58% of the people that live in New York City do not own an automobile. 50% of the people that live in San Francisco do not own an automobile. Would you continue to invest in automobile stocks? People are making different kinds of choices about how they want to move around. and how they make. And so you as a community, that's one of your choices. You need to think about what is the mobility we have? How easy it is to move around our region? Do we give people choices, and Zipcar and Cars to Go and Uber and bike share are all things that have been developed in many cities now as giving people choices about how they want to move. And increasingly what we are watching, and you can see the numbers, is that the number of building permits in cities and the suburbs where historically there were a lot more building permits being issued in the suburbs, now it's about 50-50. We are watching a real boom in many cities, big cities and small towns of choices that people want to make. I was talking to somebody from Germantown just recently, and they're building their first new apartment complex in 25 years there because people want to make choices about where they want to live. And they want to have different choices, but it's about the quality of life that we're talking about. So cities that I'm seeing be successful have these 8 ingredients. One is they need to understand clearly their competitive advantages. You can't believe your press releases. You need to be sure that you understand what are our competitive advantages, our location, the river, the quality of life. What are your competitive advantages, your university and healthcare? And then in a very focused way, how do we begin to build on those? That's where the leadership comes in, and it can be the private leader or a public leader. The mayors are very important in this conversation, but it is also the private leadership. In Cincinnati, I think the best development in America is happening in Cincinnati right now because of the private leadership of the business community there that raised money and took responsibility for the redevelopment of downtown Cincinnati in a really blighted neighborhood right adjacent to downtown called Over the Rhine. It's a remarkable story worth looking at. It's about knowing where you want to go. If you don't know where you want to go, you're not going to get there. And this conversation today, I think, begins to plant the seeds about how you figure out where you want to go. It is about having an entrepreneurial culture. What does that mean? It means you need to be willing to take risk. And that is particularly tough for a mayor. Because newspapers, sorry, Eric, always report the failures, not the successes, with the same level of impact. And so, but the communities that move forward are communities that understand that they need to take risk. They need to invest in their future. It's about how you build a public-private partnership culture. Everything I've heard about the Memphis and the region, you have that. I thought the mayor from Arkansas talked about being left at the altar twice by Toyota. And I might be absolutely wrong about this, but if the conversation with you about Toyota, and you knew that if it was not only Arkansas, but the governor of Mississippi and the governor of Tennessee, 3 governors and a whole community coming together to have a conversation with Toyota, that might have been a different conversation, a different result. And maybe that happened. I don't know that it happened. Did that happen? It didn't happen, okay? And so if you need a real life example of what happens when you don't work regionally, this poor guy is out there by himself, okay? Trying to convince Toyota to come to Arkansas, and half the people that would have worked in that plant probably would have lived in Tennessee. And yet that Tennessee wasn't in that conversation. That's the conversation that needs to follow this day. Of how you make that happen like that overnight. You get an idea that Toyota's coming here, we're all together in this, and we're going to bring it together. That's a public-private partnership culture. You don't need to think about building the partnership, as poor Bridget had to go. It happens. The knowledge of financing tools. And I'll talk a little bit more about this when I became mayor. In every city, if I go to the mayor here, and I say, Mayor, do you have money to invest in this stuff? And he said, I don't have any money. We're broke. Every city's broke. He's lying to you. Every city has money. Michael talked a little bit about it before. It's not necessarily your money. It's new market tax credits. It's historic tax credits. It's a host of other programs. And maybe the city needs to put some money in. But what's your budget, Mayor? 70 million? $670 million. He has money. It's not a question of the money, it's the question of what the priorities are. And you need to have those priorities. The priorities can't be just today. I know you all want more police, and there are potholes in my street I want fixed. And they need to happen efficiently. But you need to give the mayor room to take some of those resources and say, we're going to invest in the future for Memphis. And we're going to take some risk in those investments. I don't know if they're going to work or not, but we're going to have to take those risks. And if you're going to build something, it's about building something really spectacular. You know, when I fly into Memphis and there's a sign that says, welcome to Memphis, and it might say we're a world-class city or we're a musical city, you would never think to put on that sign, welcome to Memphis, we're a mediocre city, would you? But what I see when I come into the community says that loud and clear. So hold Frank Ricks and your other architects' feet to the fire. Say, if we're going to build something, let's build something really spectacular. Let's do something really good here. Because that's what says to our community, look at us. Not only to yourselves, but the whole rest of the world, look at us. Look at what we have built. And that is that design excellence. And the other is none of this happens because we have great mayors. It happens because the mayors have created great staff. And you have a region that's working together on one vision about where they want to go. Let me give you some quick examples. You know, is it in the water in Minneapolis or what? And you drink some of the same water, right, out of the Mississippi River? No, you don't get your water out of the Mississippi. And you go down, all the way down. So maybe you're not drinking. How does a community, 7 counties, 179 local governments, all agree to put 40% of their new tax revenue from industrial and commercial buildings into a common pot that they share? How does that happen? No place in America has done anything at that scale. And you think about what that means. That means that Arkansas and Mississippi and Tennessee wouldn't be competing with each other. We'd all be winners, regardless of where that Toyota plant went. If it went in Arkansas, didn't matter because we're going to share that benefit. That's a remarkable example, and the extreme example of how communities made a decision to work together as a region. But Denver is another good example. Seven counties in Denver, 50 local governments, Republican and Democrat, mayors and county executives all stood up and encouraged the citizens to vote for a sales tax increase. They voted for it in 2004. How many of you have been to Denver lately? How many of you have been down by Union Station? Pretty remarkable, isn't it? What this did is that Denver is now building a 120-mile transit system through the region. It has created a huge economic boom. If you go to Union Station, which was a rail station with two trains a day running through it, there's now on a former railroad yard, there's now $2 billion worth of development down there. 3,500 apartments, 2 million square feet of office space, a whole new neighborhood being created because of the transit. There's a dozen other there's 78 stops on this. There's more than a dozen other developments along that. I'm not suggesting you build transit. I'm suggesting that you think about what it means to invest in yourself in a smart way. You know, and I might offend some of you, and I'm sorry if I do. Actually, I'm not. But we live in a moment of time which is the big lie theory of government, which is that we can have great schools in wonderful cities and nobody has to pay anything. And if I say that, it's sort of silly, isn't it? And communities that get it are communities that are willing to say, we're going to invest in ourselves. We're going to build a city that we want and not wait for the federal government or the state government to give us something like beggars. We're going to do what we want. So you have Denver, or you have Oklahoma City. Nobody would suggest a liberal place in America, making decisions to raise taxes on themselves, the voters themselves voting for it, to tax themselves because they want to invest in their communities. That's Union Station in Denver. It's an incredible story. I want to also talk about the development patterns that you do, because this is the regional conversation you need to have. This is a Tallahassee, Florida study, okay? If I built, and they're expecting they're going to have 46,000 new households in Tallahassee by 2030. 46,000. So if they build those households sort of 1 unit per acre. Everybody gets their own acre of land. It's going to cost them $9.5 billion just to put the roads in. That's sort of some people's idea of heaven. But what does that do to your taxes? If you build at 8 units per acre, which is sort of some density, some single-family detached houses, it's only going to cost you $1 billion, 9 times less in roads if you build it. If you build a higher density of 20 units per acre, which are sort of townhouses, and this is assuming that this population, it's only going to cost you $500 million a year in new roads. That's a choice that your community is going to make about how you build out this region and the choices you make about how to do it. That's part of the regional discussion, because this drives your congestion. This drives your water and sewer. I haven't even talked about water and sewer costs with expanding that out. How you develop and how you think about as a region, one community and the next community to develop, has a lot to do with cost. One of the most remarkable stories, and this has existed for a long time, is Cleveland has a Metro Park system that encompasses 5 counties, excuse me. This is a park system, and I'm gonna suggest to you that I think one of the really the most important asset that I think a government can provide is open space for people. And this Metro Park system runs through 5 counties, and I've ridden my bike through this whole thing. It connects. You can ride a bike all the way through those 5 counties on this spectacular, in this park system of trails, and there's some parkways in it. It is really lovely, and it connects communities all throughout that, rich communities and poor communities. Think about what you could do here if you thought of yourself as a region, and maybe this is the easiest thing to do. You have some bike developments happen. You have a great bridge, bike trail going across. How you begin to weave this whole community, the whole region together through a series of bike trails. You know, we did this in Pittsburgh. I can ride a bike from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Washington, D.C. It's 345 miles and never go on a road. Hundreds of thousands of people doing it now. Old coal mining towns that were dying along where now the bike trail, and there was an old abandoned railroad right away, are now thriving because people are staying there and stopping for dinners, and it has really been a very interesting impact on what a recreational opportunity can do. We're getting to my town, Allegheny County, which is where Pittsburgh is the largest city, but there are 132 other governments in Allegheny County, 132 mayors, 132 police departments in our one county, 523 in our region. And by the way, we're a tri-state region also. Pittsburgh, West Virginia, and Ohio all meet. And so we, in fact, at our airport, have more people working who come from West Virginia than have come from the city of Pittsburgh. Because it's actually closer to West Virginia. And so we have some of the same challenges you do. And we were, and I'll talk about this, a dying region. We had lost our industries. And in the middle of that, in 1993, we made a decision to raise taxes on ourselves, to raise our sales tax to 0.5%, to explicitly invest in what we call our regional assets. And it required all 132 municipalities to agree to do it. And they all did, both Republican and Democratic municipalities. And we raised our sales tax. And what did that mean? Is that we were a community, and the mayor will be able to say that at the end of the day, after you pay for police and fire and your debt service and you're fixing the potholes and everything, there's not a lot of money left over for the parks or for cultural activities or for a lot of other things like that. And they were dying in Pittsburgh. And we had a zoo that was mediocre at best. And we made a decision, one, to privatize some of those, but also to tax ourselves to invest money in these things. The largest source of this goes to the libraries. So we built a really robust library system. They're not the libraries of when I was a kid, but they're community centers. We built them in some of the worst drug corners in Pittsburgh. I got this idea from Mayor Daley in Chicago, use the libraries as an economic revitalization target and put the libraries at a place where you want people with good purpose to be going, not just with bad purpose. And it works. It's really a remarkable example of how you can revitalize a community using libraries. The second largest source, and this is generating almost $100 million a year now, goes to our park system. The others go to the culture, the symphony and the ballet and the opera and theater and a whole host of other ones. And one of the other things we use, so the culture gets a lot of it. In our riverfront parks, we've went from having no riverfront access, very little in Pittsburgh, to almost 30 miles of riverfront trail now up and down the rivers of Pittsburgh. And how many architects and planners in the room? So what were you all smoking and drinking in the 60s and 70s? So here you have right across the river, that's where the Ohio River starts, right across, this great city, this great view. And what's the highest and best use of that property on the river? Surface parking lots and a road. So the Steelers lost the Super Bowl, so we blew it out. And we built a new football stadium and a new baseball park and a new convention center, which at the time we built it was the largest certified green building in America. And that's that riverfront now, instead of took the road out. And I mention this to you because Pittsburgh was a city between 70 and 90 that 500,000 people left the region. 300,000 of those people left Pittsburgh. That's why you have so many Steeler fans in Memphis. And so one of the other, Dr. Johnson was commenting about how people were moving from the north to the south. Well, Pittsburgh contributed to that. And the people that were leaving were the young people. We became the second oldest county in America. And it wasn't because people were retiring to Pittsburgh. It was because our young people were leaving. And they were leaving because the steel industry literally collapsed and disappeared. And we were left with a city of thousands of acres of abandoned steel mills, and our cultural institutions, our baseball team was thinking about leaving, the hockey team was thinking about leaving. We were a city that did not have a clear future. And we made a fundamental decision in Pittsburgh not to manage decline, to think about, to imagine a different kind of city. And what drove us and our ability to do that were the universities and hospitals, and our ability to think of them not just as places where people get educated and people go for health care and get research, but as also our economic engines. And they became great partners for us. And the business community and the political establishment and the universities worked very closely. Every week I met with the business leadership group, the university leadership group. We made a decision. I'm going to put Mayor Strickland on the spot here. We made a decision. So we've lost half of our population. Take a guess what our budget looked like. We went from 600,000 people to 300,000 people when I'm becoming mayor. And we were junk bond rated, and our pension fund was 12% funded. And I could have spent my time trying to get our bond rating up and fund our pension fund, but we'd have still been declining. So we made a very controversial decision. We took $6 million out of our operating budget and used it to finance a $60 million bond issue, which we called the Pittsburgh Development Fund. And we went to the business leadership and the foundation leadership, and we said, join us in investing in a new Pittsburgh, and they raised $50 million. So we were the only community in America at the time. We raised our own money, $110 million, to invest in our future. And with that $110 million, the first thing we did is we bought 1,500 acres of vacant land. We bought whole steel mills that were abandoned. They were in bankruptcy, and we bought them out of bankruptcy. And we cleared those. And we began to shape a new future. A lot of developers I talked to in Pittsburgh at the time said, oh man, I don't think that's going to work. I would never develop in that. We had people from out of town who had more confidence in the future. And we were able to shape a different city. So we went from a city in 1980, 85, 90, that had a 22% unemployment rate and 50,000 people a year were leaving, to a city now that has a 4% unemployment rate and is now, for the first time in 50 years, we became 10 years younger from the last census because so many young people are now moving back to Pittsburgh. That took huge risk, and that's the challenge I think you have. So the pieces of this puzzle that I've heard about all day is, first you need to think strategically. You've heard a lot of ideas. What has to happen after this is those ideas need to get put together into what are we going to do. Much as what Bridget talked about is what are the next steps? Who's the leadership? How do you divide the leadership? Don't put it all on the mayor or all the mayors. Don't put it on the political establishment. This is about this community, the business leadership and the institutional leadership coming together in the community leadership around a common vision. It's about understanding how you build those partnerships. You know, every city is like a dysfunctional family. We all fight among ourselves, but if I attack somebody in the family from outside, everybody comes together. That you need to understand that you're going to have disagreements, but at the end of the day, you need to move forward. You need to build strong partnerships. The best example I know of that is long-lasting is the Research Triangle in North Carolina, where communities came together in the 1960s. Literally 6 guys were at a country club, true story. They got rained out of their golf game, and they're lamenting the fact they spend all this money sending their kids to college, and then the kids have no reason to come back to that area of the country because it's all lumber or tobacco. And so those 6 guys literally went out and bought 7,000 acres of land, tobacco farms, and called it the Research Triangle and partnered with the universities, partners with the political and the other business establishment. Then you know the story. You know what the Research Triangle did. It fundamentally transformed that part of North Carolina. That's what partnerships and leadership and vision is about. And I mentioned talent. These are a sampling of companies that have moved recently, major operations. General Electric is moving out of a wonderful suburban area in Connecticut, moving their research and corporate offices into downtown Boston. These are companies that are following talent. You have these pieces. I mentioned placemaking. You've been to Chicago. Mayor Daley just wanted to put a grass field there. The business leadership said, if we're going to add to Grant Park, one of the greatest parks in the world in an urban area, let's do something world class, not it'll do. And out of that came Millennium Park. So that was not driven by the political leadership. It was driven by the civic leadership who understood that design was really important. And so we are at a new place. And you have a whole series of choices to make about what you want to be and who you want to be and how you want to get to wherever it is you want to go. But at the end of the day, it's about one thing. One can say it's about the money. We don't have the money. We can't afford to do this stuff. It could be the inertia of the community. It could be a lot of different things. It's three states, so how do we get together and talk with 3 states with 3 different roles? You can give me a lot of reasons why this is hard to do. There's only one reason why it happens or not. That one reason is whether you have the community will. Whether you make a choice about wanting to reach for a future that builds on the wonderful place that you have, but begins to shape a future that brings your kids back. If I look at the demographics, I've got to say you have the beginning of a problem, which is that you're losing a lot of your young families or young people. And you want to build a city that will bring them back. You want to reverse that where you're seeing that demographic of that sort of 25 to 29-year-old beginning to drop down. You don't want that to happen. We live that. That's your energy. You want to keep them here. You want to build a city that will keep them here, and that's your choice. You can do it. You have the resources here. The question is whether you have the community will. And I hope when you leave here today, you make a decision to begin to build on what you've heard, because it's all about the community will. Good luck to you.